am Stacia Garr. I am co-founder of RedThread Research. We're a human capital research advisory analyst firm. And we do a lot of work in areas that concern everybody here today. Most relevant, though, is DEIB as well as people analytics and people strategy. So for our session today, I'm going to spend a couple moments just talking about some of the research that we've done around DEIB. We include the B in it when we talk about it. And then Britt and I are going to talk about some of the work that she's doing, the amazing work that she's doing at Micron when it comes to, yes, hiring, but also specifically skills and measurement as well. So to just get started, as I mentioned, we're a research firm, and we've done a lot of work in this space, whether it's about the overall strategy and approach, DEIB analytics, and DEIB metrics. And so what we're going to talk about today is based in a lot of this work that we've done. And I always find it useful to start out a session like this with a very quick sense of definitions, because lots of folks have different approaches to what does DEIB even mean. And sometimes I find some confusion, particularly between the E, the I, and the B. So just want to level set with what we have here. I'm not going to read these to you, but I'll give you just like 5 more seconds to have a look. These are really large behind us. In our research, as many of you likely know, we see that top DEIB organizations see more positive outcomes. And I know lots of folks have done research on this, certainly McKinsey, Deloitte. When I was at Deloitte, I did work there. And then we've done a lot of the same type of work with RedThread. But in case you need another set of metrics, up-to-date metrics to show why DEIB matters, here's some that I think are particularly powerful. And the one that I think is really interesting is the individual outcomes. We found that organizations with a strong DEIB culture were 2 times more likely to give it a positive NPS to their employer than those that did not. And so as we think about the Great Resignation and people trying to retain their employees, we know that obviously having a focus on DEIB matters, but it also matters that it isn't just a kind of recent thing, that it's something that the organization has been working to do for many years, and that the organization feels like, or individuals feel like it's an authentic approach from the organization. We've seen 4 fundamental shifts with DEIB over the last 2 years. One, and Britt's going to have a chance to talk to all of these, which is why I mention them. But one of them is higher expectations of action on DEIB. We saw that after the murder of George Floyd in 2020, that there were a lot of corporate promises that were made, but now we've been long enough since then, and people are turning around and saying, hey, what have we done? What actually have we done? And how are we able to show the impact with measurement, with metrics? And that's why we're doing so much work on metrics, because look, we can't show impact if we're trying to measure the wrong things. The second thing is we found that executives are far more open to DEIB topics. And my personal hypothesis on this is that we saw with the pandemic so many executives say, hey, I've never led through a global pandemic before. I don't know the answer. And when shortly after that we had massive social justice focus, it was the same thing. I don't know the answer. Actually, it turns out I don't know the answer. And so we saw a lot more executives being open to that conversation, which led to more honest conversation and expansion of DEIB efforts and real investments that organizations are making. So with that, that's my brief introduction here. So Britt and I are going to talk about about her role, which is talent, brand, and technology innovation at Micron. And we're going to cover these specific areas. So what Micron is and its DEI commitments, and we're going to focus on inclusive hiring, skills, measurement, and some wrap-up. So Britt.
Terrific. I'm Britt Thomas of Micron Technology. I've been in the tech industry for 25 years. Nearly a decade in electronic design automation, semiconductor manufacturing, and software as well. I started my career in HR many years ago, and I have moved and navigated and pivoted, and sometimes even been adrift in what area I was going to focus on, but I've remained in HR, talent, marketing, and the technology space that supports all of those areas. Micron is really focused on how the world is transforming the data. We are headquartered in Boise, Idaho. We are a global organization in 17 different countries with approximately 45,000 global employees. We are a manufacturer as well, so we have 2 different types of talent in our organization, which is always very important for us to keep in mind as we address some of these areas. Again, very large, 49,000 patents, which is incredible for us, and again, the 4th largest semiconductor in the world.
So one of the things we wanted to talk about is Micron has been very public with its DEI commitments. So can you talk a little bit about what those are, which we've put up here, and how you all came to have them?
Yes. So I actually came to Micron as a referral from our Chief Diversity Officer, which was a really rewarding experience for me. At Micron, we believe that our DE&I commitments are everyone's responsibility. It is something that our organization has always been passionate about. In the last 2 years, we created DE&I commitments that, as you'll notice, aren't only TA's responsibility. They're across the organization. Each of our commitments also has an executive sponsor tied to them for progress and incremental reporting on how we're doing. We really believed that it was time to declare something publicly that we were going to hold ourselves accountable to as an organization. And there was a lot of investigative work. We're a data-driven company. We used a lot of data to figure out which areas we wanted to focus on. We partnered with our employee resource groups. Our board of directors were part of this conversation, our executives, and our employee population as well on what should those key areas be. One of the most important pieces of it, in my perspective, is that it's tied to our financial rewards for all of our employees. So again, everyone has an active role and responsibility to helping us achieve these commitments.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most notable things about what you all are doing is that connection to financial goals, but that means then that there has to be a strong measurement element because no one obviously wants their financial goals to be a little bit wishy-washy. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Can you share with us your responsibility here? Kind of what is your responsibility for being part of the measurement and the driving of these commitments?
Sure. So some of them obviously start with talent, our people, and from the front end of that is how we hire our people and how we influence. So my organization is really focused on how do we go out and attract diverse talent with diverse dimensions into our organization. And what does that look like in each country where we operate? In 17 different countries, it looks very different than what we do here in North America. Some of it is religious-based, some of it is persons with disabilities. We really have to take a different approach for each country where we operate so that they feel that they are included in these goals. My organization is also focused on the technologies that we use to make that happen. You can't have goals like this and not have data to support how you're doing and whether you're achieving them or not achieving them. And my team is very focused on our reporting and analytics around how well we're performing in those areas.
And I think one of the things we talked about with regard to data and analytics when we were preparing for today was how you all are addressing bias within the data. So can you share a little bit about how you're doing that?
Sure. One of the things we wanted to do is recognize and have more recognition for the fact that most of the bias starts very early on, and it starts before you're an employee with an organization. It starts during the hiring process. A referral program is a great indication of that, right? For many decades, referrals got bumped to the front of the line because they knew someone. And what we decided to do was use the technology to anonymize our resume. So as talent comes in to our organization and our applicants come in, we purposely and with a great amount of intent hide that information when we surface them to hiring managers. And when I say we hide some information, we make anonymous their first name, their last name, their address, anything that could relate to their socioeconomic status. Even some of our volunteerism, we realize much of the volunteerism that we see is religious affiliated, and there is bias around religious affiliations as well. So we've anonymized the resumes so that hiring managers can see who's in the funnel and indicate yes or no, they've met the qualifications and the calibrations, and then move them forward. So we start really early in the process. Do we know farther in the hiring process those diverse dimensions will be exposed? Absolutely. But we wanted to start right at the very beginning.
Great. Just a quick show of hands of folks here. How many of you are anonymizing your resumes? Is anyone else doing this right now? Eightfold, yes. Cool. Yeah, I think this is something that we're seeing a lot more of. Organizations doing this. As you point out, at some point it will come out, but you're trying to start with the top of the funnel and addressing some of that bias. Yeah. Is there anything else that you all are doing?
So we also, when I spoke a little bit about referrals, we do have a differential payment for URGs that we bring in for referrals. There was a lot of conversation around doing that the right way. How do you do that? How do you ensure you're not pushing people to the front of the line? And what I would say is we use the technology to, enhance the apply experience for all talent. And then we use the anonymous resumes so that hiring managers don't really need to know the funnel for which people came into the system, but they can assess them fairly.
Great. And just so people have perspective, how much differential are we talking? Are we talking like $5 difference, or what are we talking about
It's significant. It's significant. And again, it's self-disclosed. We looked at some competitors, what they were doing, how they were doing it effectively. As someone applies, they still go through the same application process as anyone else. And if they declare and disclose their diverse dimensions, there is an additional bonus paid out to that employee who has referred them. And the reason we thought it was important for our organization is our talent, is a great advocate for bringing in diverse talent. And we wanted to reward that, and we wanted to do it in a way that was fair and that people get excited about. But it is the candidate's decision. In certain countries where we operate, you don't disclose if you're a person with disabilities until you've signed your offer letter and you started on day one, because there can be stigma about that as well. So it was not an easy process for us to implement by any means, but it was important for us.
Mm-hmm. And then just to clarify, do you all have I'm sorry, I promised I wouldn't go off script, but now I'm fascinated, so I'm going off script. Do you have self-ID that folks do as they come through the recruiting process, or does that happen only once they become employees?
So they do self-identify. Again, most of it is voluntary. I know a lot of organizations wish it wasn't voluntary. I don't think that's the right approach. I think it always should be voluntary. Because people have different comfort levels on what they expose and when in the process they expose it as well. So we do ask them to self-identify. We are trying to capture that. Most organizations only capture it when the person has become an employee officially in the system. We are trying to capture it earlier in the process, and we need it for our reporting. And I would say, although it's voluntary, it is very, very helpful information for an organization to know. Are your applicants self-disclosing that information? Are they comfortable self-disclosing that information? We've seen some systems now where people are choosing not to even upload their photos because they don't want to be targeted just for diverse dimensions as well. So I think it's an interesting conversation. I think the earlier in the process you can capture it, the better you'll be as an organization on learning from that data.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I'm just going to do a show of hands once again. Is anybody else doing any referrals where you're differentially rewarding? A few folks. Okay. Yeah. So not common. So these are definitely some good new ideas that we're hearing. I want to mention one more thing with regard to inclusive hiring, or get to one more topic, which was you mentioned introducing candidate allies. Can you tell us about what that is?
We did. So candidate allies are trained. They go through a training, they volunteer. Again, it's an opt-in at Micron, and they can opt in to be a candidate ally and attend an interview panel. And the reason that was important for us is we look at the data and what people are saying about their interview experience, and did they feel that there was someone advocating for them on their behalf. And it's not just that they sit in on the interview panel itself, but they're also part of that debrief. And a debrief is a required component of our hiring process at Micron. We really advocate for, after everyone's interviewed and after everyone's put their feedback in the system, have a team debrief. And that candidate ally attends that debrief with the purpose of ensuring that someone doesn't say what that panel before us just shared. She's a working mother. She probably can't handle the travel. She might not be able to handle the commute. Or, all kinds of things come up in those debriefs when candidates are being discussed. And these candidate allies are in those conversations to make sure and draw awareness when those biases are surfacing. And I tell you, it is critical at that offer step. It's the most critical at that offer step to have that ally.
Great, thank you. And then one final point we were going to discuss is you mentioned some growing partnerships to identify new college graduates. Can you tell us what that looks like and how that's helping with this?
Yeah. Obviously, the early in career talent is going to have a huge impact on organizations and how we reach our commitments that we're making. We have a lot of opportunity at different schools, attending different schools. When I talk about schools, I also think about the anonymous resumes, because there is definitely still a meritocracy around how we hire, who we hire from, and I say that across the industry in tech. I think it's starting to change, which is good, because I think you can find incredible talent, and I hope that in the future we'll start to look more at that skills, regardless of where they acquired their skills and their experience. Looking at that as more of an indication of success or possible tenure and potential. But again, the schools, that college population is going to be is a huge target for all of us right now. And again, how do we do it fairly? It's great that we're going after all this early in career talent. It's great that they're studying things that maybe are 20 plus year veterans that the company didn't study or didn't have available to them when they were in school. But it's really important that we diversify there as well.
Great. So let's talk about skills, which is one of my favorite topics. We've actually just finished a third podcast season on skills for my company. It's called Workplace Stories, so if you want to hear all about skills, we're deep in it. But let's talk about how you're using skills, and particularly thinking about moving forward, the intersection of skills, diversity, and recruiting.
Yeah, skills is tricky. I'm hoping to learn more about that while I'm here this week with all of you from what you're experiencing. The skills journey is going to be tricky. Number one, we have people that aspirationally create their list of skills that they're phenomenal at, right? And there's no way to counter check that. I think the combination of advocating for what skills people have, what courses they've taken, the inference of the AI is going to be important. But it's also going to be important to cross-check it with maybe 360 feedback or their managerial surveys and how their teams feel. When you talk about the competence of technical competence and then managerial competence, you're talking about two very different skill tracks, right? And I think you need to balance both of that and figure out how to make it flow. My organization is very focused on the incoming talent and how we calibrate the skills of applicants and map that to our job descriptions, which are also calibrated. But the flow is not easy. The flow hasn't been figured out. And you really need to be able to map it from beginning to end, from when someone applies, what skills they have, what skills they need to develop, all the way through the employee life cycle. And it has to be fluid. It has to keep changing. And I know one of the speakers spoke about that this morning. Skills that are really popular today won't be popular, in 5 years. And, as we talk about that and as we talk about what's next in the next 10 years and what we'll be doing, all I can think of is probably not this. I don't know what it'll look like, but I think our skills will all be very different, and how we utilize those skills will be very different in our organizations.
So question again for you all, how many of you are currently working on skills right now, trying to figure out how you're going to be using them? Okay, so a lot of you are doing that. Maybe we can spend just a minute talking a little bit about the tech, since we are here, and because I think we talked about that you're using Eightfold on the front end, but you're using something else on the back end. So can you maybe talk about that whole process and what you're working through to connect them?
Absolutely. So we do use Eightfold, and we use Workday as our applicant tracking system and our core HR tool. And Workday has a skills cloud, and Eightfold has their skills and inference, and the two don't map. So we're really looking at, again, how do we map it? How do we make it flow all the way through? And learning and development is really passionate about this, right? They want to own skills mapping, and then the talent side's like, well, we kind of want to own our portion. How do we come together as a team? And organizations and leaders want a highly skilled workforce. So they're ready to place some bets and put some money on the table, but they really want a thoughtful approach of where do you place those bets? Do you place them with your candidates and maybe incentivize them? If they have 7 of the 10 skills, do you incentivize them financially to get those other 3 skills, with an offer that's waiting for them? For your current talent, how do you incentivize your current talent to keep upskilling? They may or may not want to keep upskilling. So there's got to be an incentive, and it can't just be a promotion or moving up the ladder. There has to be an incentive for that type of culture, that it is an always learning culture. And I think there's a lot of money in this space, and I think most of us in the room are trying to figure out how to make that money return for us with our investments and our strategy on how we figure it out. I don't think one organization is going to figure it out. I think it's going to be the coming together of many leaders and thought leaders thinking through how to make it work.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk with us just a little bit more on the nitty-gritty of, you said, you've got recruiting who wants to lead on this, talent wants to lead on this. I imagine you have a people analytics team who's got a horse in this race as well. Yep. So how are you getting everyone, how are you herding the cats to make this work?
I think it's becoming more of a dire need right now, as we're seeing the attrition levels spike in our organizations. Talent is moving in and out. People are taking career breaks. There's a new philosophical approach of it's now or never. Like, we're either going to get it going or we're going to fall behind. And I think the teams are creating kind of these innovation pods of how can we do it? What have you heard? Go talk to people, see what they're doing, what's working. Where do you start? The starting point is probably the hardest part. And every organization has tools they already love, right? Everybody says, no, I want you to use what I'm using. Don't use that. I want to use this over here. Or, hey, we're already paying for this. Make it work. And that's a tricky conversation. And it's tricky with executives, too, because they just want the fastest means to an end. And that may work in the immediate time frame, but long term it won't, and it'll break down. And you won't be able to accurately report out on the things that you really care about as an organization. So I think it's definitely a team effort, and I think if you don't already have those conversations happening between multiple orgs, you really should, because there are stakeholders throughout the company that want to provide feedback. And if you're focused on inclusion and belonging, you need to figure out how to allow them feedback while also show them, a proposal of what you're thinking through. And it doesn't have to be all in one phase. It can be incremental, but I think all of us are already working on that.
Great, thank you. So we're going to spend just our last few minutes talking about measurement of inclusive culture, because I think, it's so important to bring in diverse talent, but if they don't feel the inclusiveness when they join, it's not so helpful. So, so can we talk a little bit about how you're measuring inclusion today, and where did that come from?
Sure. We survey our employees like most companies. We do it once a year. We ask them, we have an inclusion index as part of that survey, and we listen to the themes. We have free text comments, although talk about analytics struggles. Those free text fields are hard to manage, but I think what people offer in those surveys is really important to listen to. Now, we're not naive. We also know that many employees don't feel there's enough anonymity when they do share things around inclusion and belonging and leadership. And so we also are very focused on our external social listening. And There are a lot of platforms out there, and there's a lot of people talking about how it really feels to work for your organization or on your teams or for specific leaders. We listen socially to what people are saying, even, like I mentioned about interview experience, that's important for us. We look at Glassdoor like many companies. There's a fallacy around that it's all your disgruntled employees. For us, it's not. 60% are current employees, and that's important for our leaders to know as well. And these are people that are going out and sharing information on these platforms to make other people aware. And so when we look at our inclusion, we also look at our retention rates of our URG populations and our diverse dimensions at the organization. We absolutely keep a close pulse on how we're doing there. But again, I think the social listening is critical, and also empowering people to be honest and encouraging that culture of trust. There are still many organizations where people don't feel they can freely communicate if things are happening or they are experiencing microaggressions. And we've all read in the news, there's companies that have gotten it very, very wrong, that have been made very public. But I think it's everybody's responsibility. And when you take that approach to your inclusion and you closely measure it, you closely measure where were you 6 months ago? Are you getting better or are you getting worse? And I think right now, with so much change happening, more frequent measurements of inclusion are required. Return to work, return to site, all of those things are really starting to change some of the data that we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. And as you think about not just the measurement, but then the response, and because you mentioned trust just a moment ago, what does that responsiveness look like? How are you communicating the results back, and how are you communicating what you're doing to respond?
Yeah, I think anytime you survey, you have to have an action plan on what you're going to do with the information. I think, employees are very vocal about being asked what they think, and then decisions are still made at a higher level that maybe they don't agree with. And I think right now that is driving a lot of the uncertainty and unnecessary friction in organizations. So I think going back to the trust piece, people need to know you're going to do something with the information they're providing. And if you're not going to do anything with the information you're asking them for, they're going to stop giving it to you. They're not going to give it to you in your internal survey. They're going to give it to you externally. And you're going to read it on Reddit. You're going to read it on Blind App. You're going to read it on all these other sites, which you probably don't want to be on. But it will be said, and that is your culture. Your culture is that chatter that you should be paying attention to and you should be socially listening for. Lots of tools in the market to listen socially on what's happening and what's being said. It's just not usually used for HR. It's usually used for marketing and your customers. But if you start using it for HR, you'll be in a different position.
Yeah, I love that idea of applying something different. All right, we have just about a minute left. So are there any lessons learned that you want to share with the audience across these three areas, hiring, skills, or across measurement?
I think the measurement is important. I think it's great to come out with commitments and declarations, but I think what's more important is to keep coming back to those and coming back on your progress. Are you making progress? Are you not making progress? Lessons learned, we have a senior leadership team that attends our ERG meetings. They're in the meetings. They are listening. They want to understand the sentiment of the employees. So an actively engaged team is critically important to getting us to where we need to be. In our industry, I feel like talent acquisition has for years been pushing diverse talent into the pipeline. But we haven't had a way to actually call out when it's working and when it's not working. Or if there are managers perhaps that might not be using it or might find a workaround. So I think right now having close measurements in place and very well declared and defined goals is really helpful for organizations.
Great. Well, I just want to say as a wrap up, if there's anything that you heard today that you want to know a little bit more about, here's both of our contact information, so please reach out to us either here at the event or on LinkedIn. We would both love to talk more. And I wanted to say thank you very much, Britt, for your thoughtfulness and your openness. We came on here saying we weren't going to pull any punches. We were just going to say what was happening. So hopefully we did that. And also wanted to just say thank you to Eightfold for the opportunity to be up here and to share what we're doing. So thank you.
Thank you.